Welcome to the Medical Union in Uruguay. We are in the framework of the Extraordinary General Assembly, and that is why we are introducing the table with Dr. Trochansky, President of the Medical Union in Uruguay, Dr. Tucci, President of COFILE. Of the meetings carried out by this organization. Recently, a few days ago, when we launched the first course of cannabis medicine for the whole of Latin America, we spoke of our mission as a medical union, particularly as a professional organization, and we spoke of what our union must do from
desde el punto de vista del conocimiento y desde el punto de vista de la corresponsabilidad. Y creo que el poder hoy
I believe that the possibility of speaking and having such a high-level presentation about the social determinants of health goes hand in hand with commitment in organization towards society, the need for providing answers and making questions regarding the different health realities in our country. We must be committed with that reality and contribute to solve it in different manners. Knowledge, because of course we need to generate knowledge starting from facts to give answers to the questions made every day in our health reality and in a responsible manner, because we believe that health is built together. Co-responsibility in health generates commitment from physicians, but from society in general, and it's a two-way situation. We need this for the outcome at health level and at social level to be good. The health determinants, of course, are not foreign to us as regards their involvement in the health reality and that of our population. We have experienced other periods during which this sort of parameters were not borne in mind, and there was a health with parameters and realities that conditioned the lives of Uruguayans throughout. That at present our reality is something of which the medical union is part, and it has encouraged it, in which we take into account precisely the social determinants that health needs to bear in mind to be appropriate for our fellow citizens. We take into account the benefits of contributing at health level with an integrated national health system that is taking steps and bearing fruits with more equity, more universal, with better access and coverage for all citizens. And we follow this together with vital processes in these determinants. It is a reason for pride in our countries to see the fall in the child mortality rates. We know this is an important landmark in the health of citizens throughout life. Therefore, this is part of our commitment as an organization, our commitment as medical union, as a professional organization, and as part of a society which is every day trying to generate a social and health reality that is increasingly fairer and healthy in relation to what I said. So welcome everybody, and essentially our guest. It will be a pleasure for us to be able to listen to him. Thank you. Now, there are many people who have sent greetings and thanking us for hosting this lecture, but who couldn't come for different reasons. Among them, the President of the Republic, Dr. Tabaré Vázquez, the Vice President of the Republic, Mr. Raúl Sendic, the former President of the Republic, Dr. Jorge Valle, the Minister of Education and Culture, Dr. María Julia Muñoz, Senator Carola Arriaga, the President of the State Health Services, Dr. Susana Muniz, and the National Representative, Nivea Reich, among many more, who have wished us the best success tonight. Now we will hand the floor to the President. Good evening, everybody. First, I wish to thank the medical union in Uruguay, and I said it this morning and I repeat it again, and maybe tomorrow also. It is a reason for joy to have in our historical home as many other leaders I have memory of, some of which are not present today, are no longer with us in our lives, but who set an important precedent in what is related with unions in Latin America, the start of Conferencia, and this is the reason why we're all here together. So I greet Dr. Trochansky and say thank you for hosting this historical event here tonight. And we thank the medical union for everything they have provided and organizing this event that is really wonderful. We have dealt with different topics related with issues regarding health in Latin America. And I also wish to greet the minister who is with us tonight, Dr. Jorge Basso, who so kindly contributes to allow us to express ourselves and have the occasion tonight. I also celebrate having Sir Michael Marmot with us, and he will later lecture on topics he always proposes. Our secretary, Mr. Iguren, is also here with us. And I wish to make a significant effort in relation to some things that have occurred that make us very sad. One of our members in Confemel from Ecuador was unfortunate because he lost his son, his grandchild, and a daughter-in-law in the earthquake, and also a nephew, and that is why he isn't with us tonight. I requested a minute of silence this morning, but I want to repeat it tonight for this very unfortunate event for our brothers and sisters in Ecuador. So we request the attendees to stand in a minute in silence. Well, special recognition for all the Confemel members who have been here from the Americas, the Caribbean, and those who accompany us from the old Europe, Spain, and Portugal. Many have not been able to be present tonight for different reasons. Some of our leaders not present here are persecuted in their country, have difficulties, are not allowed to attend an extraordinary assembly such as this for Confemel. For them, our acknowledgement for this effort, in spite of all the difficulties faced, to continue belonging to Confemel. Some others with economic difficulties to attend, but always thinking that if they don't come this time, maybe they will be able to come the next to benefit Confemel. We have discussed a very important subject tonight, that is social security for physicians, and this will be made extensive to the countries that are not present, and that generated a very deep debate. Tomorrow we have another significant topic, that's aggressions to the health personnel. This is a subject that has many consequences, occurs throughout and also in Europe. We will continue working for Confemel, and surely in the future there will be many topics such as specialties, certification, recertification, and other topics that are surely being discussed at present in the World Medical Association, and that are likewise important for Confemel, related with the aging of the population. The World Medical Association discusses all this, and we know that Confemel will do so with the depth it deserves. It has been important today to have new organizations entering. One is the Brazil Medical Association and the Guage Medical College from Ecuador. Two new members for Confemel, our recognition towards them. Our next meeting will be very soon in Portugal, and we will discuss many topics apart from those discussed here, and many new ones. We will surely have support for those being able to attend from the Confemel organization and the European organizations that will also attend this important event. And to end, I wish to add, and you know it, but in case you don't, we just remind you that we are hosting in our country, in Argentina, the preliminaries, and tomorrow the World Medical Association meeting will start tomorrow. They will have an assembly, and the council will also be working. So for those who will attend, the people invited who said they would go, well, this will be very important for our country, Argentina, to receive them. Well, I compliment the organizers. Thank you. Now we will surely listen to Sir Marmot. That is it. Yes, thank you. Let's hand the floor before to Dr. Jorge Basso. Good evening, Mr. President of the Medical Union and other authorities in the Union, President of the World Medical Association, Dr. Marmot, and other Confemel members visiting our country, senators, and people related to the academia, the medical school, teachers, physicians from the country. It is a pleasure for any Minister of Health to participate in such an event that regards a topic that seems obvious because it's something that seems evident is that the social determinants are closely related to health. But after you begin to work, it's important to recall it, particularly because we are living in a very changing world where technology and issues related with specialties, equipment, seem to be the master key to improve the health system. And of course, without acknowledging the importance of all the technological and scientific progress, there's no health that is successful that doesn't part from health policies aim to strengthen the rights of the population in the area of quality of life. Speaking of social determinants, we must speak of rights of the inhabitants for better health and better lifestyle, for all those aspects related with the possibility of better enjoying life. And naturally, when governments do things well, when we have policies promoting equity, social inclusion, and a reduction of poverty, surely population is empowered and requests more and better life conditions, and that's why it isn't wrong to regularly involve the whole health team and the medical corps, in particularly in stressing the importance throughout our training and actions and thought to always put first the rights of the population of users and working in line with precisely serving our population. So it is a pleasure to be here to listen to this lecture that will surely leave us thinking in order to be better individuals, better professionals, and more committed with the health of us. Thank you. Well, now we're going to read a brief summary for those who are not aware of the significant history of Sir Michael Marmot. He was born on the 26th January 1945 in London. He moved to Sydney when he was young. There he studied and graduated as a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery. He continued in Berkeley University, California, with a degree in public health and a PhD with a thesis on cardiovascular health in the Japanese American population. He was responsible for the Social Determinants of Health Committee in WHO, Director of the Institute for Society and Health, Professor and Researcher in Epidemiology and Public Health for University College London, Honorary Member and Fellow of the British Academy, appointed gentleman, I think, in relation to the inequities of health. Vice President of the European Academy, received the, I don't know what award in 2004, and another award, William Graham, for research in the area of health services. He is past president of the British Medical Society and is currently president of the Council of the World Medical Association. So now we hand him the floor.
Minister, presidents, distinguished colleagues, life expectancy in Sierra Leone is 51, and in Japan, it's 84, a 33-year gap in life expectancy across the world. When we look within countries, in the US city of Baltimore, for example, that I wrote about in my book, The Health Gap, that somebody asked me to sign this evening. In the US city of Baltimore, men in the poorest part have a life expectancy of 63, and in the richest part of 83, a 20-year gap within one city. We see similar gaps in London. It's not a US problem. So we have dramatic inequalities between countries and within countries. And my starting position is that these should be remediable. There's no good biological reason why we should have such startling differences across the world. I've mentioned it once, I'll mention it again. I start my book, The Health Gap, with the sentence, what good does it do? Why treat people and send them back to the conditions that made them sick? When I was installed as president of the World Medical Association in Moscow last October, I made clear that my priority as president was to try and engage national medical associations, individual doctors, and indeed the World Medical Association on the issue of social determinants of health. When we came back after the dinner, after I was installed, there was a group of Latin American doctors waiting for me to get off the bus, and they said, "We need you for 5 minutes." My wife said, 5 minutes? I'll see you in an hour. And Latin American colleagues, many of whom are here, said, we think that the World Medical Association has not taken us seriously. We need you. And I said, I'm going to conduct a review for the Pan American Health Organization, and I need you. So we need each other. And they said, come to our Conferencia meeting, come and talk to us. Tell us what you have in mind. On the 10th and 11th of May, next month, in Washington, D.C., we will kick off what I'm calling the Commission for Equity and Health Inequalities in the Americas. The idea is that we need to look at what is happening and what can happen and what the evidence suggests should happen to improve health and reduce avoidable health inequalities in the Americas. We want to develop and extend the conceptual approach. We want to look at regional evidence and relevance. And many countries have signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. They are potentially a mechanism by which we can take this agenda forward. And it comes in the tradition I chaired, as you heard, the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health. We reported in 2008. And of course, this region was very important because we launched the commission in 2005 in Santiago de Chile. And in the wake of that, I was commissioned by the British government to conduct a review of health inequalities in England. And I think it's relevant to my topic this evening because the question that I was asked by the British Prime Minister was how can we adapt the recommendations and conclusions of the global WHO Commission to one country? Because after all, in the Global Commission, we were looking at North and South America, at Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, Europe, Asia, the whole world. Education is important in Scotland as it is in India, but how you would operationalize it, what you would do in those places differs quite dramatically. So I was asked by the British Prime Minister, how would you adapt your recommendations for one country? And we set up a whole new review, gathering the best evidence. And I think that is some model for what we will be trying to achieve in the Americas. And in fact, when we were doing the WHO Commission, Brazil set up its own Commission on Social Determinants of Health, convened by President Lula, and it reported saying, what can we do in Brazil? Chile did an analysis of all government policies, having in mind what they could do across the whole of government, and you'll tell me whether it's been successful, to implement cross-government policies on social determinants and health equity. And I was commissioned by the director of the European region of WHO to conduct a review of social determinants and the health divide in Europe. We reported finally last year and in Latin America and the Caribbean, the context is deep-rooted inequalities, a strong tradition of social medicine, and I think a widespread commitment to action on the social determinants of health, and a recognition that progress will come through broader social policies of socioeconomic development. Let me just show you a familiar graph to make a couple of points. This familiar graph that comes from Sam Preston initially looks at income per person adjusted for purchasing power, so gross domestic product adjusted for purchasing power, and life expectancy. And what you can see is at very low levels of income, a small increase in income is associated with a big increase in life expectancy. For a country, if you haven't got any money, having a bit of money makes a difference. If your GDP is $2,000, there's more you can do than if it's $1,000. And when I've been trying to make the case in India of why they should be acting on social determinants of health, Indians say to me, when our economy is growing at 7% per annum, there are things we can do at the end of the decade that we couldn't do at the beginning of the decade. So if you're very poor as a country, and indeed as a household, a bit of money makes a difference. But when we get up here at around $10,000, $15,000 purchasing power parities, Cuba, Costa Rica, Chile, and then go all the way out to Luxembourg, there's simply no relation between national income and life expectancy. Getting richer, once you get to that threshold, is not the solution to getting healthier. And in fact, when we get up at this level, there are contradictions. Chile has about the same national income, it's not on the graph, so you've got to imagine it, as Uruguay. But Uruguay's life expectancy is 4.5 years shorter than Chile's. Argentina has a higher national income at purchasing power parities than Chile, and its life expectancy is 5.5 years shorter than Chile. So national income is an inadequate guide to the health of population. How that income is used, how it is spent, how it addresses the social circumstances in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, and the inequities in power, money, and resources that give rise to the inequity in conditions of daily life. I've just described the social determinants of health, are fundamentally important to the level of health and health inequity. I'm delighted that people are using the language of social determinants of health, as was done this evening, and that I'm here to talk to this august and important audience this evening. I'm delighted that people are using the language. Now we need to make it precise. Now we need to get the best evidence of what we can do. One of the major challenges is in country after country, we do not have information, simple information, on inequalities in health for adults. We tend to have it for children, infants, comes from demographic and health surveys, but we don't have information on health inequalities in adults. It needs specific studies. And this one from Brazil, from Porto Alegre, from colleagues of mine, Luigi Bassanese, shows what I call the social gradient. It's looking at cardiovascular. If that's for me, could you tell them I'll call back later? Thank you. I'm distracting myself. You got that, did you? It's looking at cardiovascular mortality by the socioeconomic level of the district. And it's a gradient. It's not just that people who live in poor districts have higher mortality than people who live in rich districts. It's graded. The medium-high socioeconomic level, they have higher CVD mortality than the high, the medium-low higher than the medium-high, all the way from top to bottom. And what he's done here by drawing this line, saying that if everybody living in an area below the socioeconomic level of the top had the low CVD mortality of the top, there would be 45% fewer premature cardiovascular deaths. This is enormous. Health inequalities are not a footnote to the problems that face us. They are the problems that face us, and we will not address them through the healthcare system alone. We need to look at the conditions that make people sick in the first place. And there's grounds for optimism. I've been to Lima twice in the last two or three years. I said we don't have data on adult inequalities in adult mortality in most countries, but we do for under 5 mortality. This is by mother's education in 2000. Secondary or higher, primary, and no education. The gap, the absolute difference, is 71 in infant mortality, 71 per 1,000 live births, in under 5 mortality, 71 per 1,000 live births. Now look, 12 years later, there's still a gradient, but now the gap is 23. It's gone from 71 to 23 in 12 years. In fact, the single biggest contributor to the global reduction in infant and child mortality is education of women. Education of women. More than we doctors can do. And look how quickly it can act. This is what I call my evidence-based optimism. The evidence is there that we can make a difference really quickly. Let me hammer home the gradient argument. This is not just about the poor. People in the US are now starting to realize they have a huge health problem. Look at all-cause mortality, ages 45 to 54. France, Germany, the UK, Canada, Australia, Sweden. Big differences between France and Sweden, but in all these countries it's coming down. US Hispanics, US non-Hispanic whites. Oh my God. This is terrible. And the fewer the years of education, the steeper the rise. So the gradient is getting steeper. But even people, whites with the top level of education, don't look like France or Germany or the UK or Canada or Australia or Sweden. And what are these people dying of? Number one, poisonings due to drugs and alcohol. Number two, suicide. Number three, chronic liver disease related to alcohol. Number four, violent causes of death, other than what I've already mentioned. I call this disempowerment on a grand scale. And Case and Angus Deaton call it an epidemic of despair. It shows that being rich, spending 17.5% of your gross domestic product on health care is no guarantee of good health. In the health gap, I look at life expectancy of 15-year-old boys. I say, go into a school, count 100 15-year-old boys, 13 will die by their 60th birthday in the US. Is 13 a lot? Well, it's double the Swedish level. It's higher than in virtually every European country. It's higher than in Costa Rica, Chile, and Cuba. There are 194 member states of the World Health Organization, and the US ranks 50th. A review of equity and health inequalities in the Americas has to go from the top of Canada, where there's an epidemic of suicide among First Nation Canadians, the most frightening, astonishing epidemic of suicide amongst First Nation Canadians, down to Tierra del Fuego and taking in everything in between, a major challenge. And you can see why I need help. And I want the help of colleagues in this room. So, what are we going to do? We need to address the life course. Now, you may be asking, if I'm pushing the whole argument on social determinants of health, what do I have to do with that? I'm a doctor. What's that got to do with me? I'm here to treat the sick. Somebody comes in, they're sick, I treat them, they go home again. Why are you bugging me with this nonsense? And I say, we're here to improve the health of the patients and the communities that we serve. And that means addressing the social determinants of health. And this is a report we did in Britain, but next week at the Council of the World Medical Association in Buenos Aires, I'm going to present a version of this that answers the question. When doctors say, what do you want me to do? This will be the answer to that question. And we say 5 things. Education and training. In fact, not just education and training of the workforce, but we as medical and other health professionals training the general population in an understanding of the determinants of health. Working with individuals and communities. The health service as employer, looking at the conditions for the cleaners and the lab technicians and the nurses. In Britain, as I speak, the junior doctors are on strike because of conditions of work for doctors. So looking at the health sector as employer, working in partnership, and if I were young and fit, I'd jump up on the table and say, advocates, the workforce as advocates. So let me look at some examples of what this might look like. Everything I've been talking about really is education and training. Some time ago, I was at a meeting and the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs said, I am a health minister. The Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs said, I am a health minister. Every minister, he said, is a health minister because what we do in our day job impacts on health. It's impressive. I got a phone call from an official in the Norwegian Minister of Health, and she said, you know, you've been going around the world quoting our Minister of Foreign Affairs as saying, I am a health minister. He now is our health minister, and he would like to meet you. So I went to Oslo to meet him, and I told him I'd been quoting him all around the world, and he told me he'd been to an area of southern Norway, a place I'd never heard of, and met the head of local government who said, our plans for community development have been Marmot certified. I'd never even heard of the place, let alone known that I'd certified them. But what he was saying was, look, local government in Norway is taking your ideas and applying it. Every sector is a health sector. Working with individuals and communities. Let's take the example of early childhood development. If you're a pediatrician, you know pediatricians almost better than any other specialist know and understand how the conditions in which children are raised impacts on their health and how that impacts on health through the life course. Childhood stunting by indigenous and non-indigenous status in Mexico. Non-indigenous, indigenous, so slow growth in the first year of life, 1988. And there's been big improvement, particularly in the indigenous, but there's still an unacceptable gap. Seeing the patient in a broader perspective. Indigenous women's political inclusion has been a major challenge. Female, indigenous, and poor. Seeing the patient in a broader perspective. And you mentioned human rights, Minister, in your introduction. I think it's probably reasonable to think about a right to education, or at least the right to equal treatment in the education system. That because you're indigenous and female, you should not have a diminished right to education compared to someone who's non-indigenous and not female. We've been monitoring early child development in England. So we look at the percent of children age 5 who are deemed to have a good level of development, which is, as well as physical development, psychological, cognitive and linguistic development, social and emotional development, and behavioral. So it's the percent of children age 5 who have a good level of development for each local authority in the country, classified by degree of deprivation. So here here we have the most affluent, and they're the most deprived, and you can see a straight line relation. The more deprived, the lower the percent of children age 5 having a good level of development. This graph is almost a political litmus test. People on the right politically say it's poor parenting. People on the left say it's poverty. And I say they're both correct. The social and economic circumstances in which parents are trying to raise their children impacts on the care they can give their children. We were talking at lunch about the fact that poverty in Uruguay is over compared with what it used to be, as it is in Britain and European countries. If you think about Britain in Victorian times or Uruguay a generation or more ago, we know what real destitution means. But here, in 2012, we have this dramatic social gradient in early child development. We may not have dramatic poverty the way we used to, but the more deprived the area, the worse the early child development. Can we do anything about it? Well, we can actually. What this graph shows is child poverty, where child poverty is defined in living in households with less than 60% of the national income. And it's looking at child poverty before and after taxes and transfers. Look at Latvia and Sweden. Before taxes and transfers, child poverty in Latvia was 35%. In Sweden, it was 32%. Taxes and transfers are what the Minister of Finance does. After taxes and transfers, child poverty in Latvia had gone from 35% to 25%, reduced. But in Sweden, it had gone from 32% to 12%. In Sweden, they don't like child poverty, so the Minister of Finance uses the levers that he can pull to reduce child poverty. It is a political choice. We in the UK seem to be fairly tolerant of child poverty. So we have made the political choice not to use those levers and have high levels of child poverty. That has consequences. That means more children with poor early child development. That has consequences for the health of children. That has consequences for health inequalities of those children when they become adults. And that's a political decision. I was asked by a senior politician in Britain, aren't you criticizing the government? You're being political. And I said, I'm not criticizing the government. I'm doing my job. I'm a doctor. I'm concerned with the health of the population. If government's policies are likely to damage the health of the population, it's my job to call attention. Not to campaign for the government to change, but to change their policies so they don't have adverse impact on health inequalities. So one way we can deal with the social gradient in early child development is reduce child poverty. Another way is investing in early child development, having good services. Look at these Latin American countries. The solid line is the percent of children enrolled in preschool, the percent of children aged 3 to 5 enrolled in preschool. In Cuba, it's 100%. Costa Rica and Chile, it's very high. Paraguay, Dominican Republic, Colombia, it's low. Uruguay and Argentina, somewhere in between. Now look at reading scores in the 6th grade. In Cuba, Costa Rica, and Chile, they're high. In Paraguay, Dominican Republic, and Colombia, they're low. And Uruguay and Argentina, they're somewhere in between. Look at life expectancy. High in Cuba, Costa Rica, and Chile, low in these three, and in between there. It's consistent with a life course pattern. Invest in preschool and good early child development. You get better education and better conditions in adulthood and longer life expectancy. And it starts at the beginning of life. This is seeing the patient in a broader perspective. And one of the problems, and again, we were looking at these figures today. I was sitting at lunch. You've got to be a real nerd being taken by my hosts to a lovely restaurant, sitting there having lovely, beautifully prepared Uruguayan fish, and I'm downloading the 2015 United Nations Development Report, the UNDP report, because I'm desperate to look up the latest figures. I couldn't somehow, that unpardonably rude behavior. I apologize to my host. But we were talking about income inequalities, which of course are very high in this region of the world. One measure we looked at lunchtime was the 2020, the 80-20 ratio, the percent of income enjoyed by the top 20% of earners compared with the percent of income enjoyed by the bottom 20%. And the ratio in Norway is 4. In other words, the top 20% have 4 times the share of income of the bottom 20%. In the UK, it's 7.5. In the US, it's about 8. But we start getting up in this part of the world to 9, 10, 12, 15, big income inequalities. The problem is income inequalities in this generation affect the next generation. We're all in favor of social mobility. We're all in favor of our children having better opportunities than we did. What this graph shows for these rich countries is the similarity in earnings between adults and their adult children. So if adult children have exactly the same income as their parents, a country would score 1 on this measure. So the US and the UK are quite high. Rich parents, rich children, poor parents, poor children, middle parents, middle children. If there's no relation between the income of parents and the income of children, the country would score 0. And so Denmark, Norway, and Finland are quite low. More social mobility. The problem is this correlates with the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of income inequality. So let me try and put this into plain English or Spanish. The greater the distance between the rungs of the ladder, the more difficult it is for the next generation to get from one rung to the next. So the bigger the inequalities, the more it damages the next generation. We, in the medical and health professions, have a responsibility to point this out. Health sector as employers. Ratio of income and completed secondary school between women and men in Latin America. So the gender income ratio, in other words, women earning 0.7 of what men earn, and completing secondary education. You can see that there's been progress made in completing secondary education in the gap between men and women in all of these Latin American countries. But the gender income ratio is lagging way behind. 0.4 in Mexico, 0.42 in Chile, 0.48 in Venezuela, 0.451 in Ecuador. The average for Latin America is 0.51. Colleagues, there's a long way to go on gender equity. And if we look at informal employment, males, informal employment's been coming down dramatically. And in fact, the male-female gap's been getting bigger. Why is informal employment an issue? No security of tenure, low pay, poor working conditions. Occupational health is a problem if the employment is informal. And there's a huge gender gap. Why should women be subjected to this gap, to these problems, more than men? We've also been looking at the quality of work. European data, looking at 2 measures of stress in the workplace. Low control, having little control at work, and imbalance between effort and reward. High effort without getting appropriate reward. The lower the occupational class, the more likely are people to be subjected to low control at work and imbalance between effort and reward. And the evidence shows that both of these increase risk of coronary heart disease, of mental illness, and indeed of sickness absence. One of the things we want work to do is to get us out of poverty. People go to work to get enough money to feed their family. These are British data looking at poverty, or strictly being below the minimum income threshold. Let me say a bit more about
Permítanme hablar un
education.
poco más de la educación.
The health sector
El
needs
sector
to work
salud
closely
debe
with the
trabajar
education sector.
estrechamente
I said earlier
con el sector
that the number
educativo. Ya
one
dije que
reason
el
for the
motivo número uno
decline
de la
in
caída
infant mortality
de mortalidad
globally was
infantil
education of
mundialmente
women.
es la educación de las
Look at
mujeres.
all of these countries. Infant mortality by mother's education, no education, secondary or higher. And what you see here, I think, is that the differences between countries in infant mortality are less for women with secondary education or higher. The differences are bigger for women with primary education. If you're in a country with high infant mortality, educating women is a way to reduce the infant mortality. But if we reduce infant mortality, won't the world be full of babies? Well, no, actually. This is fertility rate, births per woman, no education, primary, secondary or higher. India, women with secondary or higher education, 2.1 children per woman, total fertility rate. Ethiopia, 2. Bangladesh, 2.5. When women are educated, they can choose how many babies they want to have. And proportion of women agreeing that it is acceptable for her husband to beat her if she refuses to have sex with him. Astonishingly high figures in some countries. But the more education, the less likely are women to endorse this ghastly proposition. So education is good for women's own health and men. It's good for the health of the next generation. It's good for women being able to control their reproduction. And it's good for them being able to control their bodies, having the right to be treated with dignity as a human being. Education can do all of that. We in the health professions have to be working closely with education. Is anyone listening to me? And the answer is, yeah, they are. This is from England. The King's Fund did a survey of 65 health and well-being boards in local government. This is in local government, not in the health service. And they asked them what were their priorities. 49 of the 65 said Marmot principles. We came out top. From all the other possible principles, they were taking the review I showed you, Fair Society, Healthy Lives, the Marmot Review, which was translating the WHO Commission recommendations for England and applying them in local government. The English city of Coventry declared itself a Marmot city. I was there a few weeks ago. They were asking my permission, as if it were needed, to be a Marmot city for another 3 years. You probably don't know this, but the logo of Coventry is Lady Godiva. You know the story of Lady Godiva. She was concerned with what her husband was doing for poor people, so she took all her clothes off and rode through the city naked as a protest. I said, oh dear, now that you're a Marmot city, do I have to take my clothes off and ride on a bicycle through? Their logo was a marmot, a little furry marmot on a bicycle. So this was dangerously close to home. The point is, we're working in partnership. The West Midlands Fire Service, Birmingham, England, the firefighters were desperate for me to come and spend a day with them. And when I finally agreed, they had produced a report improving lives to save lives, applying Marmot principles in the West Midlands Fire Service. And they're getting kids off the streets. And these kids, instead of engaging in petty crime and doing naughty things, they're getting them climbing rocks, playing in the fire station, all through life. One firefighter, a woman, you know, with things on her shoulders, that she got up and told this story. People were telling stories all afternoon, and either they were in tears or I was in tears. These stories were so moving. So this firefighter, this woman, was called to the flat of an old man because there'd been a fire. By the time she got there, the fire had gone out, and this old man would not let her in. And she, the firefighter, tried for 3 weeks to gain entry to this man's flat, and finally he let her in. Turned out he was in his 80s, living alone, and she said, "Why did you have a fire?" And he said, "I was cold." "Don't you have heating here?" "Well, I did, but they turned the gas off." "What do you do here?" she said. He said, "I don't do anything." "Do you watch television?" "Well, I used to, but they turned the electricity off." "Do you see anybody?" He went out periodically to the corner shop to buy some tea bags and some biscuits, and that was it. So the firefighter got busy. Her dad wondered where his old clothes were going, as she clothed this old man. She cooked him Christmas dinner. She got the doctors to come and see him and sort out his various medical problems. She eventually got him rehoused into better accommodation. The firefighters in the West Midlands in Birmingham say, make every contact count. If they go into a house and they suspect domestic violence, they know they're not equipped to deal with domestic violence, but they also know who to call, who is a specialist. Make every contact count. So I went back to the British Medical Association and said to the general practitioners, this is what the firefighters are doing. What are you doing? They're out there improving people's lives. What are you doing? Are you serving your community the way the firefighters are? This is working in partnership. And the workforce as advocates. I hope you're getting the message by now that I think we have a responsibility to tell the truth, to alert to the issues in wider society that need to be addressed if the health inequalities of our communities are going to be addressed. In Toronto, in Canada, they've produced a screening tool for poverty to be used in family care, for the doctors to use. It's a better tool than screening for prostate cancer, I can tell you, more accurate. Screening for poverty. We know in Europe that social expenditure makes a difference. This is poor health, the probability of being in poor health by education, primary, secondary, and tertiary education, by the generosity of the country in its social expenditure. the more generous social expenditure is in purchasing power parities, the better the health and the shallower the social gradient. Spending on welfare and benefits improves health and narrows health inequalities. We need to say that when our governments are getting ready to cut everything in sight. And to come back to where I started, we can make a difference really quickly. Compare these countries. In the 1950s, the gap between Peru and the United States in life expectancy went from about 43 to 66, a 23-year gap. Now look at these same countries. We're going from about 69 to 76, a 7-year gap. Wow, 50 years, dramatically smaller. And in fact, there's Cuba, actually slightly longer life expectancy than the US, as does Chile and Costa Rica. We can narrow the gap between countries really quickly. And we can narrow the gap within countries really quickly. This is stunting in the first year of life by family income quintiles. In 1974-75, a steep gradient. 89, a bit shallower. 96, 2006-07, the gradient was nearly flat. We can make a difference really quickly. In our European review, we were dealing with countries, because Europe includes the whole of the former Soviet Union. So Europe includes Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan and I forget what other stan, and the health, I don't know how you translated that, the health of some of these countries would not look out of place in sub-Saharan Africa. And we said, if you're doing very little on social determinants, do something. It'll make a difference. If you're Poland or the Czech Republic and you're doing things, joining the European community, you had to put social policies into place, do more. And if you're Sweden and Norway and doing a lot, do it better. There's something here for everybody. Thank you.